The Cursed Showtown. Back in the early years of the Ming Dynasty, tucked far into the southern countryside, there was a small town named Shou, a quiet place surrounded by mountains, where the mist clung to rooftops and the wind whispered like voices through the bamboo groves. People lived simply by farming, pottery, and weaving. Life moved slowly, peacefully, but that peace didn't last. It began with a single disappearance. A young woman named Elmai never returned home after heading to the market one early morning. Her parents thought she'd perhaps gone to visit an aunt in the next village. But when she didn't return the next day or the day after, worry turned into panic. A search party was formed. They combed the riverbanks, the hills, even the nearby temple ruins. On the fourth day, her body was found deep in the forest, tangled in dry undergrowth. Her face was pale and calm, as if sleeping, but one detail froze everyone to the bone. Her left ring finger was missing, cleanly severed. The villagers buried her with heavy hearts, calling it a tragedy. Some said it was the work of a wild animal. Others murmured about bandits. But as the days passed, and another girl disappeared, then another, those murmurs turned into fearful prayers. Each time, the victim was a young woman. Each time, her body turned up days later. And each time the same detail. One finger missing. Always the ring finger, always the left hand. Panic settled like a heavy fog over Showtown. Girls no longer left their homes alone. The town gates closed earlier each night. Families lit incense and prayed to ancestral spirits for protection. But nothing worked. By the time the fifth body was found, fear had fully devoured any sense of normal life. No one believed it was coincidence anymore. Something or someone was taking these girls. The way the fingers were removed, so clean, so precise, it wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. And worse, there was now a new rumor. Some villagers whispered that the bodies didn't look fresh, that the girls, though missing for just a few days, had the scent and color of someone who'd been dead far longer, as if their blood had stopped flowing the moment they vanished. Then came the story of the copper silk. A potter named Ang Cs, a quiet man who lived on the edge of town, said that near where the third victim had been found, he saw something strange tangled on a branch, a long, glistening thread that shimmered oddly in the morning sun. He picked it up and brought it home, thinking it was just a strand of dyed silk someone had dropped. But the moment he touched it, he claimed he heard a sharp, high-pitched hum like a woman screaming inside his own skull. His nose began to bleed. He dropped the thread and never saw it again. He swore the thread wasn't normal silk, it was metallic, too strong to tear, too cold to be natural. Others mocked him, called him drunk. But that same night, his daughter vanished. 3 days later, her body was found. And yes, her ring finger was gone. After that, the town elders began calling it the cursed silk, and the disappearances were said to be the work of a ghost, not just any ghost, but something much older. A QCCN, the ancient woman demon, a spirit of a betrayed woman whose wrath lingered through centuries. A name people whispered, but never spoke aloud during the night. Elder women recalled tales their grandmothers once told about a woman long ago who was falsely accused of witchcraft, tied with copper silk threads, and burned alive during a village ritual to purge evil. Her screams were said to echo for 3 days before her ashes were scattered. It was a story people dismissed, a folktale, until now. One villager, BALAC, said that in her youth, her mother had warned her, "If you dream of a woman in red with no face, run. That's the bride of the copper thread. She takes what was taken from her, love, breath, and a finger." More disturbing still, someone pointed out that all the victims had recently been promised for marriage. All had worn betrothal ribbons. All had been engaged, and an ancient belief, the ring finger was sacred, believed to contain the vein that ran directly to the heart. Was the ghost punishing love, or worse, was it stealing it? At this point, the town sent word to the provincial magistrate, but help was slow to arrive. In the meantime, an experienced BE a kind of investigator or constable named Tan Akn Fong arrived from a neighboring district. He was in his mid-30s, sharp-eyed, and known for solving strange cases that others gave up on. Tan didn't believe in ghosts, at least, not when he arrived, but he believed in patterns. He collected detailed reports on each victim, their names, their daily routines, their social ties. He visited the sites where the bodies were found, traced the surroundings, sketched symbols he noticed carved faintly into bark, spirals, loops, knots that looked disturbingly like thread. One night, he camped alone near the forest trail where the sixth body had been found. Hours passed. Nothing, just the wind and the rustle of leaves. But close to midnight, he heard something, a soft tink-tink, like tiny bells clinking in the dark. He stepped closer, heart pounding. Then he saw it, dangling from the tree above a length of thread, copper gold, shimmering unnaturally. It swayed, though there was no wind. Ten reached out slowly, carefully wrapping it around a stick instead of touching it directly. Just as he did, he felt a wave of nausea, as if his blood had turned cold. Then came the whisper. She never said yes. Tan turned, but no one was there, only the thread swinging gently in the air. He returned to town and stored the thread in a sealed jar lined with rice and charcoal, as instructed by the old exorcist he met on the way into show. The old man had told him, if it's a cursed object, it needs grounding, rice for purity, charcoal for the dead, and if it's alive, don't break the thread, or it'll follow you home. That night, Tan dreamed of her, a woman in red silk robes, long black hair covering her face. She stood in the middle of an empty bridal hall, silent. Then, she raised her hand, her left hand, missing a finger. She pointed at him. He awoke gasping, heart racing. From that moment, the case stopped being just another job for him. It became personal. He needed answers. Why was the ghost or killer targeting these women? What did the missing fingers represent? What did the cursed silk truly do? But most of all, how many more would die before the truth was revealed? The next morning, a seventh girl vanished, and this time she was the daughter of the magistrate himself, the sleepless investigator. Tan Akn Fong had always believed that truth could be found if you looked hard enough. As a BE an investigator of the court, he was trained to read between lines, study shadows, and listen closely to what wasn't said. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for Showtown. He hadn't slept for 3 nights. The case was crawling into his bones. Each night he laid down, he would hear whispers outside the window of the inn. Or perhaps it was just the wind, curling through the alleyways like the edge of a sigh. But every time he closed his eyes, the same image returned. A woman standing at the edge of a field. Red silk robes, long black hair, a hand raised, pointing, and one missing finger. The seventh girl, the magistrate's daughter, had disappeared only 2 days earlier. It sent the entire province into a frenzy. Soldiers were dispatched, roads were blocked, homes were searched, but none of that mattered, because if the ghost or killer followed the same pattern, they had only 1 more day before her body appeared, fingerless. Tan didn't wait. He returned to the last known site. She had passed a small bridge leading out of town, where she had supposedly gone to meet a friend. There was nothing unusual about the trail. No footprints, no blood. But something caught his eye. Tangled in the weeds near the edge of the stream, A thread. It was faint, almost invisible in the daylight, but when the sun struck it, it gleamed with a metallic glint, not gold, not silver, but copper. And unlike any thread he had seen before, it didn't feel like fabric. It was colder, heavier, almost like wire. He didn't touch it with bare hands. Instead, he used his knife to carefully lift it and coil it around a piece of bamboo, then sealed it inside a cloth pouch with rock salt and ash protection taught to him by an old monk years ago. He didn't know if it would work, but it made him feel less helpless. That night, he didn't even try to sleep. He sat at the edge of his bed, candlelight flickering against the wall, staring at a map of the town. He had marked every location where the girls had gone missing, every spot where their bodies were found. And now, with the seventh girl missing, something became clear. Each site formed a curve, not a perfect circle but like a hook, a fishing hook, or a thread being pulled through fabric. If the pattern held, the next stitch was going to happen near the abandoned silk weaving house, on the outskirts of Show. It had once been the town's pride, a place where the finest silk was woven, rich enough to be sold to officials and nobles. But decades ago, it had shut down after a fire broke out mysteriously, killing 3 workers. Some said it was an accident, others claimed it was punishment for greed, and others still said it was where she had died. The woman in red, the bride who never wed. Ten made his way there just before dawn. The villagers had long stopped going near the place. The windows were boarded, but most of the boards had fallen. The doors sagged on rusted hinges. The roof looked like it would collapse if you stared too hard. And yet, the air around it was oddly still. He stepped inside. Dust covered everything. Old looms stood like skeletons in the shadows, cobwebs thick as silk curtains. But in the center of the floor was something new. A shoe, a woman's embroidered shoe, fresh, untouched by dust. He knelt, inspecting it. It matched the description of the magistrate's daughter's clothing, but there was no blood, no drag marks, no signs of struggle, only another thread, long, thin, coppery. It stretched from the shoe across the floor and disappeared under a broken loom. Ten followed it, carefully. He moved aside the loom and found a trapdoor beneath it, half covered in old rags. The thread vanished into the cracks. He hesitated, then opened it. A wave of cold air rushed up to meet him, carrying with it the smell of incense and rot. He lit a lantern and descended slowly, down a narrow staircase carved from stone. The steps led into an old cellar, but it wasn't storage anymore. It was a shrine. Candles were lined along the wall, melted into pools of wax. Dried flowers were scattered across the floor, and in the center was a figure seated, motionless, wrapped in red silk, a mannequin. At first, he thought it was just a doll, but then he saw the hair, real hair, long and black, flowing down its back. The silk wasn't just cloth, it was interwoven with copper thread, so tightly bound it shimmered like skin. And on its left hand there was no ring finger. Ten felt his breath catch. Beside the mannequin were 7 small bundles of cloth, each marked with a name. He unwrapped one. Inside a dried, shriveled human finger. He staggered back. The bundle slipped from his hands. Something moved behind him. Not a noise, not a shadow, a breath. He turned. The mannequin was facing him. He hadn't touched it. It hadn't moved. But now it was looking straight at him. Its empty silk-wrapped face tilted slightly, and though he couldn't see eyes, he felt them burrowing into his soul. Then came the voice, soft, faint, like it was inside his chest. She said no. Tan stumbled up the stairs, nearly dropping the lantern. He burst out into the morning sun, gasping, hands shaking. But in his panic, he almost missed the figure standing by the tree nearby. A girl, the magistrate's daughter, alive. She was barefoot, her dress torn, staring blankly ahead. Blood trickled from her left hand. She was missing her ring finger. Tan rushed to her, wrapping her in his cloak. She didn't speak, didn't resist. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Just one repeated motion, her finger pointing back at the weaving house. And then she whispered, "She's still waiting." That evening, the girl was returned home. Her body was weak, but she was alive. The physician said she would recover, but her mind might take longer. She seemed unable to recognize even her own father. Tan reported his findings: the shrine, the fingers, the mannequin. But when the soldiers went to investigate, the trapdoor was gone, sealed shut beneath smooth, untouched wood. No shrine, no fingers, no thread, just dust and rats. And the mannequin? Missing. Some said he imagined it all. But that night, as Tan removed his outer robes, he noticed something on his wrist. A thread, thin, copper-colored, tied like a bracelet. He didn't remember putting it on. He tried to cut it, but the knife broke. He tried to burn it. It wouldn't burn. And when he looked into the mirror, for a split second, he saw a woman behind him, dressed in red, missing a finger. The ninth finger. There was something sacred about the ring finger, or so the elders said. In the old beliefs, it was the finger that connected directly to the heart through a hidden vein, a symbol of love, of union, of promises made in this world and the next. That's why engagement rings were always placed on the fourth finger of the left hand. It wasn't just a tradition, it was a binding ritual. But in Showtown, that same finger had become a mark of death. Tan and Fong couldn't sleep again since finding the magistrate's daughter alive, but mutilated. His mind had refused to rest. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that copper thread on his wrist, felt it tighten ever so slightly, like something unseen was waiting to drag him somewhere he couldn't return from. That morning, he met with an old historian who lived in the nearby monastery. The man, a hunchbacked elder with cloudy eyes, was rumored to have studied forbidden scrolls and family records buried for generations. When Tan showed him the copper thread and told him about the missing fingers, the old man grew pale. His hands trembled. "I never thought it would return," he muttered. Tan leaned forward. "You know what this is?" The old man nodded slowly, then began his tale. More than 150 years ago, during a famine that swept through Show, many women were sold into forced marriages, some even as spiritual brides to dead men. These were called ghost marriages. Families desperate for food gave up their daughters to wealthy clans whose sons had died young. But there was one girl who refused. Her name was Livuingite, daughter of a low-ranking silk merchant. She was beautiful, quiet, and known for weaving the finest silk in the province. She was engaged to a poor scholar, and their love was the kind villagers whispered about with envy. But when her father's business collapsed during the famine, he accepted silver from a wealthy noble to marry her into the man's family, even though the groom had died 3 years prior. When she found out, she fled. She hid in the abandoned weaving house where she had once worked. The townspeople helped search, but many believed she had run away to join her lover. 3 days later, her body was found hanging from the loom, wrapped in copper silk thread, her face twisted in horror, her left hand missing the ring finger. It was ruled as suicide. But strange things began happening after her death. The noble family that paid for her ghost marriage suffered tragedy after tragedy, deaths, sickness, madness. Eventually, they fled. But every few decades, girls began disappearing, always unmarried, always engaged. always returned with the same missing finger, and always after that came whispers of a woman in red, with no face. Tan was silent for a long moment after hearing the tale. "Why the copper thread?" he finally asked. "Copper is a conductor," the old man replied, "not just of electricity, but of spirit. The ancients believed it could bind souls or trap them. That's why they used copper to seal curses, to sew funeral clothes, to hold bones together." Ten looked down at the thread still wrapped around his wrist. "You said it would return," he said. "Does that mean this has happened before?" "Yes," the old man said. "Every generation. Always 9 girls, always 9 fingers. The 10th is never found." "What happens after the 9th?" The old man didn't answer. He only looked up with eyes clouded like stormy glass and whispered, "Pray you don't find out." That night, the 8th girl disappeared. She was only 16. Her family said she had just been promised to the son of a merchant in the capital. They were to marry next season. Her body was found the next morning at the foot of the same tree where Livuingite had been buried. A massive banyan with roots that curled like claws into the earth. Her ring finger was gone, but this time something new was found with her. A note, written in a strange red ink, as if scrawled by a child. It read, "One more, and I will be whole." Tan's blood ran cold. If the legend was true, if 8 girls had died already, then only one victim remained. Only one finger, and then what? He couldn't wait to find out. He gathered a list of every engaged woman in the town, cross-referenced every name, every family. Only a few matched the profile: young, unmarried, newly promised. But one name stood out: Lin, the niece of the temple caretaker. Quiet, modest, recently betrothed to a traveling herbalist. She lived in the small shrine house near the cemetery. She also worked as a seamstress, handling silk deliveries, and more chilling, she was the one who washed the magistrate's daughter's clothes after she was rescued, meaning she might have touched the copper thread. Tan didn't hesitate. He rushed to the shrine house under pouring rain. Thunder cracked above, and lightning split the sky like an open wound. The wind howled like a warning. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. He pushed it open. Inside, the room was empty. A small meal sat untouched on the table. A teacup still steamed faintly. The candle burned low, but there on the floor was a thread, copper-colored. It slithered like a snake toward the back room. Ten followed, and what he saw froze him to the core. Lynn stood in the center of the room, her eyes blank, as if in a trance. Her hands were at her sides, her hair loose and wild. Behind her in the dark corner was a woman. No, not a woman. A shadow wearing a woman's shape. Red robes, hair down to her waist, face blurred like smeared ink. She stood silently, arms open. Tan shouted Lynn's name. She didn't move. The shadow did. It stepped forward, one hand reaching. The left. Tan leapt between them, pulling Lynn to the floor. She gasped and suddenly woke screaming. The shadow vanished, but the copper thread around her wrist burst into flame and disappeared in a puff of black smoke. Ten held her close. Her hand trembled. She still had all 5 fingers. That night, Tan sat alone in the temple, beside a burning altar. He understood now. The killings weren't random. They were a ritual, a completion of something unfinished, a ceremony bound in grief, betrayal, and vengeance. The ghost wasn't just angry. She was building something, piece by piece, finger by finger. A body, perhaps, a vessel. And if the 9th finger was taken, she would rise. Back at the banyan tree, something began to stir in the soil. The roots groaned. The wind fell silent, and deep beneath the ground, wrapped in silk and sorrow, a heart began to beat again. The curse of the white cloth. The tree was older than any man alive. Its gnarled roots clawed deep into the red earth of the village's outskirts, and its twisted branches had long been a subject of whispered tales. No one dared approach it after dark, not even the drunkards who had once claimed courage. With rice wine and foolish pride, that tree, the Gao tree, was where she had died. They called her the Thread Maiden. The legends never agreed on her real name. Some said she was a poor weaver's daughter who had fallen for the wrong man. Others claimed she was a powerful spirit keeper betrayed by her own blood. But what all versions shared was this: she was wronged. She was bound in copper thread. She was hanged from the Gao tree, and in her final moment, she clenched a piece of white cloth in her hand. It was said that cloth never fell, not when the wind blew, not when it rained, not even when a lightning storm split the skies above the cursed show. It hung there, faded and ghostly, like a tongue of sorrow licking the bark. Most villagers believed it was long gone lost to time or hidden in another realm, but a few had seen it, and those few never lived past the third day. Tenakn Fong had never believed in dreams until he started having the same one, over and over again. It began with silence, not just quiet, but absolute stillness. Then the sound of weeping, distant at first, like a woman mourning behind a curtain of mist. The path appeared beneath his feet, winding toward the ancient tree. A low wind carried a metallic scent, like rust or old blood. The tree rose into view, dark and twisted, and there it was, the cloth. It fluttered gently, despite the lack of wind, its edges frayed, threads barely holding it together. But it gleamed in the dream like silver under the moon. Just before waking, the cloth always turned toward Haim as if someone were still holding it. On the third morning, Fong woke in a cold sweat, his breath coming fast. There was a stain on the floorboards beside his bed, a perfect print of a bare foot. Small, wet, female. He hurried to the village temple where the old monk, Venerable Thich Chan, still held silent vigil over forgotten lore. "You've seen it," the monk said before Fong could speak. "The cloth?" Fong asked. The monk nodded slowly. "That is no ordinary dream. You have been marked." "Marked for what?" "For the same fate as those poor girls, unless you find a way to lift her curse." Fong hesitated. "Her curse? You mean the Thread Maiden is real?" The monk's eyes narrowed. "Real enough to take lives. Real enough that this entire show still suffers beneath her shadow." He opened an old scroll and pointed to a symbol etched in faded ink. It was a copper thread twisted into a spiral identical to the strange strand found on the last corpse. "She was not just a wronged woman," the monk whispered. "She was once a guardian sworn to protect this land from evil. Until the village betrayed her." Fong leaned in. "Why?" "Because they feared her power, and because men in power always fear women they cannot control." That night, Fong returned to the tree. It stood silent, unmoving, but colder than the surrounding air. His fingers trembled as he reached into his coat and pulled out the strand of copper thread. As he approached the trunk, the thread vibrated faintly at first, then harder, pulling toward the bark like a magnet. He pressed it against the tree. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a whisper. It was not a voice he could hear with ears, but it slid straight into his bonessa, sobbing, echoing wail of someone abandoned, betrayed, forgotten. The bark split slightly beneath the copper, revealing something hidden in the wood. A second cloth, white, folded tightly, stained at one end with a splash of red that had long dried. Fong stepped back, horrified. The tree had swallowed the last part of her. In the days that followed, more strange events occurred. Chickens refused to lay eggs. Wells turned cloudy. A baby stopped crying but never breathed again. The villagers began lighting incense not for blessings, but to keep something at bay. One old woman approached Fong, her eyes cloudy with age and dread. "I saw it once," she rasped. "When I was a girl, my sister dreamed of the cloth. 3 days later, she vanished without a sound. All we found was a strand of her hair caught in the bark." Fong asked, "Did she ever do anything wrong?" The woman shook her head. "Only thing she ever did was fall in love with a man promised to another. The same pattern. Broken love, a lost finger, a strand of copper, and always the cloth." Determined to learn more, Fong scoured ancient records hidden in the temple vaults. Finally, buried beneath pages of forgotten village taxes and rice harvest counts, he found a faded parchment. It was a trial document stamped by the magistrate of that time. The accused, Nguyen Tha Hoa, age 19, title, Spirit Seamstress, charges witchcraft, temptation, causing discord among noble families, sentenced to death by hanging, method, copper binding. There it was, the truth behind the myth, her name. She wasn't a ghost story, she was a girl accused and executed because she was different, because she stitched protection threads for women who wanted freedom, because she whispered blessings into the hems of dresses, because her threads stopped a lord's son from forcing a girl into marriage. So they branded her a witch. And now, she was back. Fong returned to the tree one last time, this time with fire and ritual ink. He drew protection wards, circles of salt, and placed offerings food, incense, a mirror. He whispered into the night, "Nguyen Tha Hoa, I know your name, I know your pain, and I will not run." For a long time, nothing moved. Then, the cloth swayed. A shadow stepped out from behind the tree, not walking, not floating, but unfolding like smoke into form. She was young, hair long, eyes dark with sorrow. Her fingers dripped with copper thread. One hand was clenched around the cloth. Fong didn't flee. He knelt. "Tell me how to end it." Her mouth didn't move, but her voice filled the air around him. "Find the ninth. Complete the circle. Then I rest." Before he could ask more, she faded. The cloth fell into his hands, and behind him, 9 small handprints appeared in the dirt. Back at his office, Fong gathered the case files. 8 girls had died, 8 fingers taken, 8 copper strands left behind. But the circle wasn't complete. There was one left, one girl not yet dead but marked. He opened the latest missing person report. A name jumped out, Luan, 17, seen near the market 3 days ago. Last person to talk to her, her friend, who mentioned that and had a strange dream the night before, about a cloth, white, floating on a tree. Fong's blood ran cold. The 3rd day was today. He ran. The copper thread trap. By the 5th week since the first girl's body surfaced near the rice paddies of Shothan, the village had become a hushed ghost town. Doors were shut tight at dusk, young girls were forbidden from leaving their homes alone, and even the dogs howled oddly at midnight. Fear gripped every soul like a noose. Still, another body had turned up, a ring finger severed, lips blue, and that same copper-colored thread twisted tightly round her wrist. 10 AKN Fong hadn't slept in 3 nights. The visions from his dreams, flashes of white cloth, a distant bell chime, a tree swaying with something hung from it haunted him. Worse, the villagers had begun whispering about QCCN again, blaming an ancient spirit for the curse plaguing their land. Desperate, Fong assembled a small task force with Tun Pha Diao loyal, no-nonsense officer who'd served under 3 different governors. Together, they proposed a plan so dangerous that even the seasoned soldiers exchanged glances of unease. They would set a trap using a living decoy. The decoy was a brave young herbalist named Mai Lin, barely 20. Her older brother had been a border guard, and she had inherited both his steel nerves and sharp instincts. "I want to help end this," she said simply when Fong explained the plan. No more girls should die like this. They dressed her in plain, local clothing, subtly adorned with bits of copper thread to attract attention. A tiny bell was sewn into the hem of her sleeve, barely audible, but enough to act as a distress signal. That night, as the waning moon disappeared behind thick monsoon clouds, Lin began walking the perimeter of the haunted bamboo grove where most of the victims were last seen. Tun for Diu and for others watched from hidden vantage points. Fong, meanwhile, remained close-siding under a fisherman's net near the creek. Every few minutes, he glanced at the copper bell in his palm, twin of the one Lin carried. If it rang, she was in danger. An hour passed, then two. The wind shifted, the leaves stopped rustling. A silence heavier than stone settled across the fields. Venting, ting, ting. The bell in Fong's palm began to vibrate. He jerked up, heart pounding. From across the field came a faint, echoing Chimelin's bell. But there was no scream, no rustling of struggle, no sign of where she had gone. They searched through the night, calling her name, cutting through thorny underbrush, wading waist-deep through the rice paddies. Nothing. At dawn, her copper-threaded shawl was found draped over the old blood banyan tree at the center of the grove. Wrapped around its trunk was a piece of white cloth, turned weathered but unmistakable. The same one from Fong's recurring dream. She had vanished without a trace. The villagers took this as confirmation of the curse. A priest was summoned from the provinces away to perform cleansing rituals. He arrived with a yellow scroll pinned to his chest and 3 novice monks in tow. After a night of incense and chants, he told Fong privately, "Something binds this place. It's not the forest. It's older, and it's angry." Fong didn't believe in ghostsnet until now. Not until Lin's shawl returned that night, folded neatly at his doorstep, damp with dew, and inside it an iron nail, blackened with age, and a strand of copper thread tied in a knot he couldn't undo. Tun Fadiu examined it. "This is a mourning knot," he said grimly, "used in old funerary rites. It's meant to bind the spirit of the dead to the object." Fong kept the nail in his pouch. It burned against his skin like a coal. He returned to the grove the next day alone, hoping to find some trace of Lin, alive or not. Instead, he found something else, a narrow, half-buried stone marker, hidden under roots. He dug around it with his bare hands until it was exposed fully. The inscription was in old character swern, barely legible. He took a charcoal rubbing back to the local scholar. The man paled as he translated it. "Here lies the 9-fingered daughter, bound by deceit, burned by fear. She who shall not wed shall bind others in vow." The missing ring fingers, the white cloth, the copper knots, it all connected. Back at the village, an elderly midwife came forward. She had long refused to speak on the curse, but after Mai Lin's disappearance, guilt cracked her silence. "There was once a girl," the midwife whispered, "many lifetimes ago. She was set to marry a wealthy merchant's son, but the boy betrayed her, left her pregnant, then denied the child. The village elders sided with the merchant's family, said she brought shame, so they hung her from the grow tree, used copper silk from her wedding dowry to tie the noose." "And the white cloth?" Fong asked. "She clutched her wedding veil," the woman replied, "refused to let it go even in death. It was said anyone who saw it would be cursed to walk her path." He understood now. This wasn't random. It was punishment. Each victim wasn't chosen, they were marked, women of marrying age, bound by vows unkept or hearts betrayed. the QCC nine-fingered woman was not a myth. She was a spirit wronged so deeply her grief had twisted into vengeance. Fong knew he needed to stop her. But how? That night, he returned to the grove once more, carrying only one item, the iron nail left in Lin's shawl. He placed it at the foot of the tree and lit a candle. Then he spoke clearly into the darkness. "You were betrayed. So was she," he said. "But this girl was not your enemy. She meant no harm." The wind stirred. The candle flickered. "If you want the one who made you suffer, tell me, show me. I will find his bloodline. I will end the chain." The candle went out. For a moment, silence. Then a whisper. Not a sound, exactly, but a sensation, like a cold breath inside his skull. "Find the ninth, the vow remains." The next morning, Fong went to the village archive. It was little more than a collection of clay tablets and parchment scrolls, but it held enough. He cross-referenced the merchant families from centuries past. He found one house Jiang, now long fallen, but their descendants still lived nearby. More chilling, every victim so far had ties, however distant, to that bloodline. All but one, Mylin. But then he remembered her mother's maiden name, Jiang. Fong's blood ran cold. The curse was not yet complete. 9 were needed. One more girl, one more ring finger, one more betrayal. He had to end it before the 9th, because if not, the curse would renew, forever, returned from the dead. 3 days after she vanished beneath the moonlit trees of cursed Shothan, the girl returned. But she wasn't the same. She stumbled out from the eastern edge of the forest barefoot, drenched in morning dew, her white robe torn in streaks as though dragged across thorns. Her hair was matted, streaked with mud, eyes wide, blank, her lips curved into a hollow smile that didn't reach her eyes. She said nothing, not a word. She just stood there at the gates of the Yamen court, hands folded neatly, head tilted slightly to one side, as though still listening to something only she could hear. Her parents wept in disbelief, rushing forward to embrace her. But when her mother grabbed her left hand, she let out a scream. The girl's left ring-fingered finger of promise was gone. 10 AKN Fong stared at her across the wooden table. The candle between them flickered, its flame uneasy, as though it could sense something was wrong. She hadn't spoken since her return, not even a whisper, not in her home, not in the clinic, and now, not in this room, only smiled, a hollow, pale smile like the porcelain face of a forgotten doll. "Do you remember what happened that night?" Fong asked softly. The girl blinked, slowly, then shook her head, but the smile remained. He leaned in. "Do you remember the tree?" Her pupils dilated, just slightly. "The silk." She flinched. The reaction was subtle, but it was the first real sign of something beneath that vacant expression. He noted it down carefully. Outside the room, the whispers had already begun. "She's touched by spirits now. She's crossed the veil. She saw the QCCN and lived." That night, Fong sat alone in his chamber, the unease growing in his chest like rising smoke. He lit another lantern and examined the report. The copper thread, same strange fiber found on every victim, had been tied around the girl's ankle. When she was found, not her wrist, not her neck, her ankle, like a tether. Fong scribbled into his notebook. She didn't escape, she was returned. The wind outside howled as though answering him. The next day, the girl began to draw, not with words, but with charcoal on rice paper. Her parents brought in the sketches, frightened, each one more disturbing than the last. A figure with long, disjointed limbs emerging from a tree, a mouth with no lips, dozens of fingers growing from the roots of a grow tree, a woman with a torn white veil, holding a glowing copper thread between her teeth. Fong stared at the final drawing. The veil wasn't white. Not anymore. It was red, stained. He sought out the village elder. Old Mother Juo had once spoken of the QCCN, the ancient female demon. She doesn't kill for joy, the old woman whispered. She takes what was denied her in death. A ring finger, a promise broken, a wedding never fulfilled. Fong asked cautiously, so these victims, they remind her of herself? No, they replace her, Mother L replied. Each one is a bride she never got to be. That's why they vanish before the full moon. Fong felt the cold crawl down his back. How do we stop her? The old woman stared at him with sunken eyes. You don't stop her, you free her. That night, Fong dreamt of a forest drenched in fog. He walked barefoot through the trees, copper wires trailing from his fingers. In the center stood a gnarled grow tree, its branches swaying without wind. Hanging from one of them was a woman in a blood-soaked bridal dress. Her head slowly turned toward him. He couldn't move. She opened her mouth, no tongue. Only the sound of weeping, and from her sleeves spilled dozens of ring fingers, clattering to the forest floor like broken branches. He woke up screaming. Morning came with another shock. The girl, still mute, had vanished, again. This time, her mother said she awoke in the middle of the night to see her daughter standing at the doorway, pointing toward the forest. But she never said a word, just smiled and walked into the trees barefoot, the same way she had returned. Fong gathered a small group of men and set off at dawn, tracking her steps through the morning mist. An hour in, they found the grow tree, and there she was, standing beneath it, looking up, not moving. In her hand, a piece of red fabric fluttered. Her face turned as Fong approached, and for the first time since her return her smile disappeared. She's not alone, she whispered. Everyone froze. It was the first thing she had said in days. Then she pointed upward. They all looked, and gasped. Wrapped around the highest branch was a long copper thread, and at the end of it, dangling like a forgotten marionette, was another girl. Not the one who had returned. A different one. Dead. Her ring finger missing. They pulled the body down, and as they did, something strange happened. The girl who had returned fell to her knees and screamed an unearthly sound, like metal tearing, and then fainted. When she awoke later at the Yamen, she began to cry, silently, at first, then uncontrollably. I was dreaming, she whispered hoarsely. But not my dream. It was hers. Whose? Fong asked. The woman, the one in the tree. She clutched her chest, breathing hard. She told me I was lucky, that she spared me because I smiled like her sister. Fong froze. What does she want? She wants her wedding, the girl sobbed. She wants to be remembered, to be married properly, or she'll keep taking fingers until someone makes her a bride. The villagers refused to go near the tree, but Fong ordered a ceremonial altar set beneath it. The girl helped design a gown using red silk and even placed a candle at the base of the trunk. For the first time in memory, the wind around the forest calmed. That night, Fong watched from afar. As the candle flickered and went out, a soft song echoed through the trees, a woman's lullaby. And then silence. No more girls vanished that week, or the next, or the one after that. The curse, if it was a curse, had paused, but Fong remained uneasy, because sometimes at night, he still dreamt of the grow tree, still heard that song, still saw the copper thread winding around his wrists in sleep. One evening, while washing his hands in a basin, he noticed something odd. His left ring finger, it had begun to ache, just slightly, and in his dreams, the copper thread was tighter now, almost like it was pulling. The spirit in the abandoned kiln. The path of the copper threads led deeper into the overgrown outskirts of Shothan, to a place long abandoned and half swallowed by the earth itself, a forgotten ceramic kiln. Once famous for its intricate white porcelain, the kiln had been closed for over 70 years. Locals claimed the last potter vanished during a thunderstorm, leaving behind half-finished statues and eerie, twisted shards of pottery shaped like screaming mouths and hollow eyes. Some said they saw smoke rising from the chimney long after the firewood had rotted away. Koi Dieng, together with two village guards and the elder spiritualist Trinmu, followed the faint trail of copper fibers found tangled in branches and scattered across the fields. They arrived just as the sun sank behind the bamboo grove, casting long shadows over the collapsed walls of the kiln. Despite the crumbling brick and the smell of damp clay, something in the air felt still, as if the kiln had been holding its breath all these years. Inside, among the shattered pots and dusty shelves, they found her. A statue, a woman carved in porcelain, life-sized and kneeling. Her hair was bound in the old court style, her robe sculpted with such detail it seemed to move in the breeze. Her eyes were closed, but her lips soon shut with threads of copper seemed to tremble. Her left hand was missing the ring finger. Chunmu stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's not just a statue." "What do you mean?" Dieng asked. "This kiln was once used for funerary urns," the old man replied, "and sometimes for something older, something forbidden. In some villages, they used to seal the vengeful dead into statues. They'd mix the ashes into the clay, bind the spirit in form." No one spoke. Even the insects outside had gone silent. That night, Dieng ordered the kiln to be sealed again, fearing what might happen if they left it exposed. But by morning, the bricks they laid were scattered, and the statue was no longer kneeling. It was standing. News spread fast. By the second night, curious villagers came with lanterns and incense, whispering prayers and snapping photos. Some thought it a miracle, others were afraid. A child went missing near the kiln. Then a pig was found hanging upside down, its mouth stuffed with bits of porcelain. Chunmu demanded the statue be exorcised, but when he arrived with the ceremonial tools, the statue had moved again, this time sitting with her hands covering her face, copper threads trailing across the floor like roots. No footprints, no drag marks. "She doesn't want to be seen," Chunmu said. "She's ashamed or angry." That night, the village medium had a dream. In it, the statue whispered through sealed lips, and a voice echoed in the wind. "I was promised." She woke up screaming. Her finger, the same ring finger, was missing, not cut, just gone. A deeper search into the kiln's ruins uncovered something more. Beneath the floorboards where the statue originally knelt, they found a cavity lined with crushed bone, burnt cloth, and a bundle of copper threads tied around a lock of long black hair. There was also a name carved into the wood, Ingaitan. Chunmu paled. Ingaitan, he explained, was once a potter's daughter accused of seducing a nobleman's son. When the boy vanished, she was blamed. The villagers said she bewitched him, used black magic to trap his soul. In rage, they took her to the kiln and sealed her in a statue, but not before they gagged her with copper thread. She died with her vows unfulfilled, Chunmu said. She was promised love, a life. Instead, she became clay in silence. Now she's come back, taking the fingers that bound her fate. Dieng frowned. "And the missing girls? What about the others?" "Maybe she's collecting them," Chunmu whispered. "Or maybe she's using their pain to return fully." That same night, another girl vanished, and the statuino moved to the courtyard of the village temple was holding something new in her hand. A strip of white cloth, like the ones tied around funeral wreaths. The priest, desperate, called in monks from a faraway pagoda to perform a sealing ritual. Chanting filled the temple, incense thickened the air. The monks poured holy water over the statue, tied blessed talismans to its limbs. But just as they began the final chant, the candles blew out. A sharp sound echoed from inside the statue like cracking ceramic. And then the priest gasped. The statue's mouth had opened. Copper threads spilled out like blood. 3 monks collapsed. One spoke in tongues, eyes rolled back. Another bit off his own finger. Dieng, panicking, ordered the statue destroyed. They brought hammers, chisels, fire. But each strike was met with scream-snot echoes, screams, as if the statue itself was crying. The fire refused to burn, until the youngest monk stepped forward. He placed a single lotus flower at the statue's feet and said, gently, "We're sorry." That night, the statue returned to its kneeling pose, her mouth sealed again, her hands folded. But her eyes open now watched silently. Dieng wrote in his report, "The spirit has quieted, but not gone. She still watches, and I fear she still waits." 3 weeks later, a traveling merchant came to the village with a porcelain teacup he claimed to have found in the nearby fields. The cup was pure white, perfectly shaped except for a tiny crack along the rim. He sold it to a woman in the next village. That night, she dreamed of a woman in white, sewing copper threads through her mouth. 3 days later, the woman disappeared. All that remained was the cup, and a faint fingerprint missing the ring finger. In the hearts of Shothan's villagers, fear remains. They whisper her name only during the day. They hang red string and copper bells on their doors, and they never, ever touch porcelain left alone in the dark, because Ingaitan was promised love. But all she found was silence, betrayal, and fire, and she's still looking for someone to finish the vow. The secret of the T family. For over 100 years, the T family was whispered about with both reverence and fear. Their influence once stretched across the entire Shothan region, but after a swift and mysterious downfall, their name was only mentioned in hushed tones, as if invoking it could summon something unholy. The T ancestral ground sprawling over several hectares had long been sealed off by thorny bamboo hedges and superstitions. Locals believed whoever stepped inside would suffer either madness or vanish without a trace. And yet, in light of the most recent hauntings, especially after the discovery of the clay statue bound by copper threads, the village authorities had no choice but to revisit the place. The clues pointed there, the nightmares led there, the whispers all echoed from there. On the 3rd day of the ghost month, a group of officials, including the aging Mandarin L and several brave soul searchers, stood at the threshold of the T family mausoleum. The night before, a monk had performed a ritual to weaken whatever lay sleeping beneath the earth, but even he refused to enter the grounds. The air was thick with rot and old incense as they pushed open the rusted gate. Inside, the earth felt wrong, spongy, damp, and oddly warm. Old gravestones were scattered, most illegible, but at the center of the courtyard, behind a decayed wooden shrine, they found what they were looking for. A sealed stone door with 9 lotus symbols, carved across the surface, each marked with a faded blood-red thumbprint. The village historian, an old man named Fook, murmured under his breath, 9 lotuses, 9 daughters, the legend might be true. With trembling hands, they broke the seal and pushed open the heavy stone. Inside was a vaulted underground chamber, colder than ice. Mold clung to the walls, and the air smelled of ancient death. But what lay at the center of the room made even the most hardened soldiers freeze. 9 coffins, each ornately carved with lotus motifs, yet all eerily identical. Each coffin contained the remains of a young woman long decayed. But the detail that caused gasps and gags was unmistakable. Each skeleton was missing the ring finger on the left hand. Clean cuts. No decay on that specific point, as if the amputation had happened much later than the death itself. At the foot of each coffin lay a strip of copper thread still bright and untarnished. But most terrifying of all was the object resting on a stone pedestal behind the 9th coffin. A scroll, sealed in lacquer, bound with copper, a contract. Fick hesitated before opening it. But he did. The parchment was yellowed, the writing in both Chinese and Vietnamese Nam script. But one line was burned deep into their minds. Let it be known, on this blood-stamped contract, that the House of Tea offers 9 lives in exchange for prosperity everlasting, bound by copper. Sealed by the forbidden rite of Tamem. 9 blood thumbprints confirmed it. One of the guards muttered, "They sacrificed their own daughters?" "No," said L, voice hollow, "not their daughters, other people's daughters, stolen, bound, cursed." The realization hit everyone at once. The copper strings, the missing fingers, the blood packs. These were the same signs as the cursed girl who had returned days earlier mute, broken, and missing her ring finger. The past was not sleeping. It had been waiting. That night, something unholy awoke. The clay statue in the old kiln moved again. This time, a villager saw it clearly through the shattered roof. It had turned its head. The stitched copper across its mouth had snapped, and in the morning, the woman who had seen it was found at the edge of the riverbank, missing her ring finger, smiling with empty eyes. In the ancestral hall of the tea estate, the coffins now sat uncovered. Though the bodies had long rotted, the copper threads shimmered unnaturally. Fick insisted they burn the scroll, but the monk returned, this time pale and frightened. "You cannot destroy a curse with fire," he warned. "The pack was made with blood. Only blood can undo it." "What kind of blood?" someone asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the 9th coffin. "Where is the 9th finger?" It was true. 8 of the coffins had skeletal remains missing the ring finger, but the 9th still had all 10 fingers intact. That night, as L reviewed the notes, he made a disturbing connection. The girl who had returned mute, smiling, missing her finger had come back exactly 3 days after disappearing. But it was not just her. Every victim in the last month had vanished for 3 days and either returned broken, or never returned at all. The theory formed like frost in his mind. The curse was being reawakened. One by one, spirits were being reborn into stolen bodies. The missing finger was not a sign of damage, but a mark, a binding, a renewal of the pact. The girl who had returned might not be the same soul anymore. The town fell into a new kind of fear. Every woman under 30 was ordered to wear protective amulets. Copper strings were avoided. The kiln was sealed against by morning. The doors were open every time. Some said they heard chanting inside. On the 7th night, Fuckshu, curious for his own good, snuck back to the kiln with his journal and a lantern. He never returned, but his journal was found in the morning, lying at the base of the statue. The last line, scrawled in a frantic hand, read, "She is the 9th. That was when the pieces came together. The girl who had been used as bait in the fake kidnapping had vanished, and returned mute had never spoken again. But her presence felt wrong. Her parents noticed she no longer reacted to music she once loved. Dogs avoided her. Children cried when she approached. She stared at the fire too long. And once, her mother caught her silently mouthing words with no voice, like a silent incantation. When they checked her hand again, the scar where the finger had been severed had changed. It now bore a faint lotus-shaped mark. El ordered she be brought to the temple for a final ritual, but by the time they arrived she was gone, vanished. In her room, only one thing remained, a thin copper thread, coiled like a snake, and a page torn from Fuchs' journal. On it, in her handwriting or something mimicking it, was a single phrase: "One more, and the pact is complete." In the weeks that followed, the nightmares spread like fire through the province. Girls dreamt of a woman hanging from a red silk tree, holding a white cloth. Others saw 9 shadows walking along the river, whispering names. The kiln was burned to the ground, but when villagers returned days later, a new statue had formed from the ashes, head tilted, mouth stitched shut once again. This one had 10 fingers. The blood contract, though hidden deep in the temple vault, was found unrolled one morning, with a 10th thumbprint added in fresh red ink. El resigned, the monk fled, and the villagers began leaving offerings at the edge of the estate, hoping it would be enough. But those who remembered the old stories knew it wouldn't. The House of Tea had built its wealth on borrowed souls, and now the debt collectors had returned, and the cursed lotus was blooming once again. The faceless woman. Ever since the tombs were opened and the blood pact was unearthed, strange things began to happen to Koe Levan, who, at first, it was just a pressure in his fingers, a tightening sensation in his left hand that came and went like a cramp. But then, the dreams began. Each night, he found himself standing alone in a thick, gray mist. He could not see the sky. There were no stars, no moon, only fog, and the distant sound of a bell ringing, faintly, like it was coming from deep underground. And then, she would appear, a woman, wearing a tattered red wedding dress, its hem soaked as though she had walked through rivers of blood. Her posture was stiff, jerky, like a marionette on invisible strings. But it wasn't the dress that haunted him. It was her face, or rather, the lack of it. Where her eyes, nose, and mouth should have been was a smooth, pale surface, blank, featureless. Only thin threads of golden silk crisscrossed her face, loosely stitched like someone had tried to sew facial features onto her and failed. Every time she appeared, Levan who tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. His arms would seize up, and worst of all, his left ring finger would begin to throb as if a tight cord were slowly cutting off its blood supply. In one dream, she raised her hand. Her fingers were long, skeletal, and pointed at him, and then, without warning, she shrieked, a shriek so piercing it shattered the silence of the dreamscape. He woke up drenched in sweat, his heart racing. But what disturbed him most, there were ligature marks around his ring finger, faint, red, and circular as if someone had tied a thread around it tightly while he slept. Who tried to dismiss it, told himself it was stress, hallucinations. They were knee-deep in a supernatural investigation, after all. But the dreams only grew worse. He visited the old pagoda near the outskirts of Shothan, hoping the monks could explain what was happening. The head monk, an elderly man named Thichingyandi, examined his hand carefully. When he saw the mark, he fell silent. Then, without speaking, he motioned for Hu to follow him to the back of the pagoda. There, behind a sealed wooden door, lay a hidden chamber, dusty, with incense long since burned out. On the wall was an ancient painting yellowed with age depicting a woman in a bridal gown. Her face was smudged out, purposefully erased. Only one detail remained untouched, a thin silk thread trailing from her mouth to her hand. Beneath the painting, carved into the wood, were the words, "She was promised, but never wed." Thichingyandi finally spoke. "The faceless woman. She is one of the 9 brides." Whose breath caught? The 9 brides, 9 coffins, 9 missing ring fingers. She was one of them. "Why is she haunting me?" he asked. The monk's eyes were weary. "Because your bloodline once served House T. You may not remember, but your ancestors were oath-bound to the family. And now, the pact is broken." Back at the precinct, Hu dug into the old records. He found fragments of testimony from villagers, whispered legends, all referencing a ghost bride that had appeared before tragedies, especially those linked to sudden disappearances of women. One account, nearly a century old, spoke of a young bride-to-be named Timai Dung. She was to be married at age 18, but vanished the night before the ceremony. Her body was never recovered. Some said she had run away. Others believed she was sacrificed, offered as a spiritual seal to complete a blood contract. Another file, though nearly illegible, listed household servants from the T family estate. One name stood out, Le Sanct great-grandfather of Levanhu. His own bloodline had once lived under the roof of the cursed family. The deeper he went, the more he realized these hauntings weren't random. They were personal. Then came the night of the mirror. Hu was reviewing case notes late in the office, the precinct empty and silent. He stood to stretch, glanced at the small hand mirror he kept in his drawer and froze. There, in the reflection, behind his left shoulder was her, the woman, wearing the red dress, standing perfectly still, no face, no breath. Hu spun around. No one was there. He turned back to the mirror. Gone. But something had changed. His reflection, his own face, had begun to blur, as though the mirror could no longer recognize him. Just like her. Shaken, he returned home and locked every door, every window. That night, he placed a ring of salt around his bed, lit incense, and whispered an old protection prayer his grandmother had taught him. He didn't dream. Instead, he woke up to the smell of clay. The scent was unmistakable wet earth, kiln-fired ceramic, like the abandoned pottery kiln they had found days earlier. His pillow was damp, and on it, lying delicately, was a shard of porcelain, shaped like a woman's eye. The haunting escalated. Other members of the investigation team began seeing glimpses of her, reflections in puddles, shadows in corners, always dressed the same, always faceless. One officer, Chen Kwong, went missing after reporting he had found a second statue at the old kiln. A twin of the first, but this one with arms extended, as though reaching. When they went to investigate, the statue had vanished, but they found Kwang's hat resting on the ground before the cold remains of the kiln. And next to it, a silk thread, stained red. The province was no longer silent. Locals refused to go out after dark. Dogs barked at nothing. The sound of wedding bells, soft and distant, echoed through alleyways at midnight. The final sign came on the 7th day. Hu returned to the grave site of the 9 brides. The soil, once freshly turned, now caved inward as if something had tried to claw its way out. All 9 graves. He turned to leave only to find fresh footprints behind him. Bare feet, small, female, and leading straight to his own car. Inside, on the passenger seat, lay an old bridal veil, still damp, and stitched along the hem, in delicate red silk, were the words, "The pact was broken. The groom must pay." That night, Levanhu didn't go home. He drove straight to the base of Ba La Mountain, where an ancient shrine stood long abandoned, half swallowed by the jungle. According to legend, this shrine had once been the binding site of the T family's blood contract, built over a deep cave said to house the spirits of those sacrificed. He descended the crumbling steps with nothing but a lantern, and the blood-packed scroll wrapped in cloth. His plan was simple: burn the contract, break the curse. But as he reached the heart of the shrine, he saw her, the faceless woman, standing in the center, arms raised. Surrounding her were 8 more brides, pale and still, their mouths sewn shut with golden silk. Pooh stepped forward, heart pounding. She lowered her arms, and for the first time, she moved her hand to her face and pulled. The silk threads unraveled, and beneath was not a face, but a screaming void. Darkness poured out. The lantern shattered. Everything went black. The last thing Levanhu remembered was a cold hand gripping his ring finger and pulling. The final wedding. The full moon of the 7th lunar month hung pale and heavy above Shothan that night. An unnatural hush blanketed the village. No dogs barked, no crickets chirped. The air itself felt stiff, like it was holding its breath. Investigator Levan Cowie stood beneath the ancient banyan tree near the edge of the rice fields. Heart pounding. He wasn't Alana. Hidden behind the tree with him were two officers from the capital, sent secretly after reports of spiritual unrest in this cursed province. Their job, observe the wedding whispered about for decades. The so-called final wedding of the ghost bride. Locals believed that every year, on the Ghost Festival, one final soul would be offered to a spirit known as QCC, an ancient female entity, said to have died on her wedding night, bound by blood to a dark ancestral pact. But this year, something was different. This year, Kai had proof that the ceremony was no myth. Earlier that week, he had followed a series of clues, visions, and dreams. Faded blood seals found under the T family's ancestral altar, and that same silver thread which had led him to the cursed kiln in the forest. The deeper he dug, the more certain he became. This wasn't just folklore. Someone had been maintaining the wedding ritual every year, and offering real people to something that wasn't human. That night, at the hour of the ox, around 1 o'clock am, hidden watchers finally saw movement. From the shadow of the abandoned T mansion, an old woman emerged. She wore a blackout eye, her face covered by a thin veil. Despite her bent back and trembling gait, she moved with purpose, holding a tray of red candles and small jade ornaments. She was followed by a group of 7 villagers, all dressed in funeral white, heads bowed low, each holding a lotus flower and a strand of copper thread. They formed a procession, slow and silent, moving toward the old communal house at the village's edgeth, one sealed off decades ago. After 3 children disappeared there and were never found. No one ever spoke of that house now. No one dared. Kai and his men followed at a safe distance. As they approached the wooden house, they saw something that made their blood run cold. Inside, lit only by red candles, stood a woman in a wedding dress. But she had no face, just a blank, flesh-like smoothness where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. Her arms hung stiff by her side, and her veil shimmered faintly as if touched by an invisible wind. It wasn't a mannequin, it moved. The villagers began chanting in an ancient dialect, not quite Vietnamese, not quite anything modern. The language scraped against the air like claws on old wood. Kai could feel pressure building inside his ears. Then the old woman stepped forward and placed the jade ring onto the bride's finger. That's when it happened. The bride's head jerked, slowly, unnaturally. Her hands lifted, twitching. The lotus flowers in the villagers' hands burst into flames without burning their fingers, and the air filled with the sickly sweet scent of rotting jasmine. One of the officers beside Kai fell to his knees, clutching his face. "My ashes inside my eyes," he screamed before passing out cold. Kai, resisting the nausea rising in his stomach, took out the protective charm given to him by the last monk in the region, an elderly man, who had warned him not to interfere. "This isn't just a ghost," the monk had whispered. "It's a pact, a blood-bound promise that hasn't been broken for centuries." But Kai had come too far to stop. He stepped into the light of the ritual. The villagers froze. The faceless bride turned toward him, sensing something alive. Kai shouted, "This ritual is over." Silence. Then the old woman loafed a horrible, choking sound like something caught between life and death. "You think this can stop?" she spat. "The wedding must happen. It must. If she is not wed, she takes us all." Kai looked at the faceless woman again, and in a flash, he saw what lay behind the veil. 9 faces, 9 women, all missing their ring fingers, all trapped inside that shell of flesh and sorrow. And they were screaming. Each year, a new woman was added, taken, bound by blood and silence, and now the bride was full. One more and the cycle would complete. He understood now. The old blood pact from the T family graveth one found sealed with copper thread wasn't meant to protect the village, it was meant to contain her. A punishment for what had once been done to her. She was a real woman once, betrayed by her groom, buried alive to protect his family's reputation after she was accused of witchcraft. Her soul never moved on. Instead, it was kept chained by the contract, fed by new victims. Kai stepped forward, chanting a protection verse taught to him by the monk. The old woman screamed, and the villagers shrank back. The bride twitched, jerking toward him, faster now, almost gliding across the floor. Her hands stretched forward, and in that moment, Kai knew if she touched him, it would all be over. He threw the charm. It hit her chest and burst into white light. The bride screamed not with a voice, but with a chorus of souls. The light expanded, burning through the walls of the old house, shaking the ground. Kai was thrown backward, hitting the ground hard. The world spun, and then silence. When he awoke, the house was gone. Not burned, not collapsed, gone. Just an empty patch of earth where it once stood. The villagers who had taken part were found wandering the roads, confused and mute. The old woman woe turned out to be the last surviving member of the T family had vanished. And the faceless bride, no trace, except for one thing. Later that night, as Kai returned to the investigation station, he found something lying on his desk, a small copper thread, tied into a perfect loop, and beneath it a torn piece of white fabric from a wedding veil. To this day, no one in Shothan speaks of the final wedding, but every year, on the 7th full moon, someone leaves a lotus flower in front of the banyan tree. And if you listen closely, you might still hear the chanting, soft, distant, waiting for the next groom, the spinner of threads. The truth always finds a way to surface. For years, the cursed whispers of Shothan remain just that, whispers. But now, under the shadow of the 7th lunar month, and with the echoes of the last wedding still lingering in the air, the nightmare had a face, or so it seemed. The provincial constable, Maitringhu, stood in silence before the old weaving shed nestled behind the abandoned marketplace. For decades, villagers avoided this corner, dismissing it as the ramshackle workshop of a harmless mute. No one paid much attention to the man who shuffled through the alleyways, hunched beneath layers of worn clothing, his face hidden by a broad-brimmed conical hat and a perpetual trail of incense smoke. But now the pieces were falling into place. The red silk threads found at every crime scene, the copper fibers tangled in the victim's wounds, the subtle stitch marks across the sewn mouths all led here. And him, Inch Kwangfuk, he had lived in the village for over 40 years, earning a humble living mending ceremonial garments, wedding veils, and temple tapestries. People called him Laufuk Mu, Old Blindfuk. They pitied him. They never suspected him. Until the dream. 2 nights after the failed ceremony of the last wedding. Who had another visitation. It was not like the faceless bride who had haunted him before. This time, he saw the spinner. Not a ghost, no. This was something far more insidious in the dream. A man sat cross-legged before a giant loom made of bone and bronze. Red threads stretched across the frame, taut as nerves. Each thread was connected to a severed finger, and one by one, the man spun those fingers into the loom. When Hu woke, his hands were bleeding, 9 small cuts across his palms. He didn't know what they meant until he remembered the legend. 9 fingers, 9 threads, 9 brides. Phuc was the missing piece. The constable returned to the weaving shed that morning with a warrant and 5 officers. What they found inside chilled them to the marrow. Dozens of wedding gowns, all unfinished, hung like pale ghosts from the rafters. Rolls of silk spilled across the floor, their edges frayed with age. But it was the altar that stole their breath. In the back of the shed was a crude wooden shrinifer older than anything built in modern Shothan. The symbols etched into its frame matched the ones found on the blood pack from the T family tomb. Hung across the altar was a necklace made of copper wire and human knuckles. Beneath the shrine, buried under ash and burnt incense, were glass jars. Each contained a single human finger, preserved, dated, labeled with women's names, some recent, some going back 3 decades. Phuc did not resist arrest. He merely smiled, his milky eyes gazing past everyone. As though already speaking with spirits unseen, the villagers gathered, horrified, yet unable to turn away. Mothers covered their children's eyes. Elders crossed themselves with trembling hands. In the interrogation room, Phuc remained eerily composed. He neither blinked nor flinched as Hu laid the evidence before him. The blood-soaked fabrics, the copper needle, the names of the missing girls. When asked why, he simply whispered, "It began with the curse. I was only the thread." It took hours to coax the full story out of him. Phuc's family had once served under the T clan, a dynasty of wealth, brutality, and secrets. According to him, the original patriarch, Tihu K, had made a dark pact with a mountain spirit over a century ago. In exchange for prosperity and longevity, he offered 9 unborn daughters from his bloodline. The first generation resisted, burying the pact deep and attempting to break free by hiding the girls, or forcing them into early marriages. But it didn't work. One by one, those daughters vanished, cursed, blood dry, or found floating in the river with mouths sewn shut. Their fingers were always missing. Phuc's great-grandfather, the court tailor for the T family, had witnessed the horror firsthand. But instead of fleeing, he was entranced. He believed the ritual was sacred, that the spirits chose them for a reason. The weaving of blood and copper became a religious practice within their lineage. The pact had to be completed. If the 9 weren't offered in one lifetime, the burden would pass to the next. And so, it passed to Phuc. He began his offerings in silence, choosing girls who resembled the original Blue Delicate, with long fingers and fair skin. He lured them with promises of free wedding garments, invited them to fittings late at night, and used paralyzing powders laced with powdered mothwing and dogwood resin, an Old Hill tribe recipe for binding spirits. Once sedated, he would remove the left ring finger and begin the thread. But he did not kill them. He left them alive, broken, disfigured, all but one, the faceless bride. She was his mistake. She had fought back, bit through the thread in her mouth, screamed with such fury that Phuc panicked and suffocated her with silk, leaving her body beneath the shrine in the weaving shed. She became his haunting. The red silk he spun from her spirit never burned. It reappeared in every loom, no matter how many times he destroyed it. Her faceless presence followed him into sleep, and the village itself began to suffer. Miscarriages increased, brides went mad, temples collapsed, but Phuc, blinded by his belief in restoration, persisted. He believed that once the ninth finger was offered, the mountain spirit would be appeased, that the curse would be lifted not only from him, but from Shothan. The ceremony he prepared for the 7th lunar month was meant to be the finale, the final marriage between the faceless spirit and the unseen deity, the last wedding. But who had disrupted it? The ninth bride escaped, and the curse twisted back. Now, with Fick in custody, the question remained what to do with him. The village wanted blood. Yet, he was old, frail, legally blind, and not directly responsible for most of the victims' deaths. The spiritual leaders were divided. Some feared executing him would complete the offering and empower the spirit. Others argued that letting him live would only prolong the curse's hold. Who, weary and sleep-deprived, consulted the old monk from Linsen Temple. The monk, after reading the blood pact and meditating before the shrine, offered a third solution. Do not kill the spinner. Bind him, burn the threads, break the loom, then offer silence. That night, a small ceremony was held under the banyan tree at the village's edge. The weaving shed was set ablaze, the altar dismantled, and each preserved finger buried beneath consecrated earth. Fuck was not executed. Instead, he was moved to a secluded monastery far into the hills, forbidden from speaking, weaving, or seeing another person, a silent penance. And yet, even now, children whisper of a strange hum beneath the soil near the banyan tree. Brides still wake with bite marks they can't explain, and sometimes in windless night silken threads fall from the sky like rain. The spinner may be gone, but the threads of fate are never truly cut. Blood on the copper thread. The pursuit had seemed straightforward at first. After the confession of Inchquangfuk, the spinner of threads, Levan Kai thought the nightmare was finally unraveling. But nothing in Shothan was ever simple, especially when centuries-old curses whispered through the wind like unseen specters. It was late in the evening when Kai received an anonymous tip. Me at the kiln ruins after midnight. Answers lie there. The voice on the line was distorted, but the urgency unmistakable. Against his better judgment, Kai gathered a small team and drove to the decrepit pottery kiln, the place where the first hints of the curse had emerged long ago. The moon hung low, casting long shadows through the twisted branches. The kiln's bricks were cracked, overgrown with moss, and the air smelled of damp earth and forgotten sorrow. Key's heart pounded as he approached the entrance. Inside, the darkness was thick and suffocating. His lantern's beam wavered, illuminating broken pottery shards and ancient symbols etched in the clay. Suddenly, he heard a soft rustling. A silken thread fluttered down from above, shimmering in the lantern light like a silver snake. Then, the trap snapped. Copper threads shot out from the shadows, weaving around his legs, wrists, neck. They tightened with cruel precision, binding him like a spider's prey caught in a deadly web. Kai struggled, but the threads were relentless, pulling him deeper into the heart of the kiln. In the center of the chamber, a figure emerged. Not human, not ghost, but something in between. A woman, her skin pale as porcelain, eyes burning with a fiery crimson light. Her mouth was sewn shut with copper thread, a cruel seal of silence. Yet a chilling melody echoed in the air, sung from somewhere beyond the physical. The QCCN herself, bound for centuries beneath Shothan. Her spirit had been trapped by blood and copper, but never broken. Key's mind raced. He realized Fick was only a pawn, a thread in the vast tapestry of a far older, darker power. The woman advanced, her movements fluid but unnatural, gliding rather than walking. The copper threads binding Kai began to pulse with energy, tightening in rhythm with her breathless song. Memories flooded his mind, stories told by the elders. A bride falsely accused of witchcraft, Condemned to death, her spirit cursed to remain until the ancestral debt was repaid. But she was not just a vengeful ghost. She was a guardian of a secret, a dark truth hidden beneath the province. Kai summoned his courage, recalling the monk's words. He reached into his pocket and held up the talisman, an ancient amulet etched with protective sigils. The QCCN recoiled as the amulet glowed with a pale light, pushing back the copper threads. For a moment, silence. Then, in a voice that was more a hiss than speech, she said, "You seek to break the pact, but do you understand the cost?" Kai nodded slowly. "I know the blood spilled, the pain endured, but no more." She laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "Then you must face me." Suddenly, the chamber twisted and shifted. Walls melted into smoke. The floor became a swirling river of copper thread, thick, sticky, alive. Kai found himself floating, unable to move his limbs freely. Visions attacked him of brides sacrificed, fingers severed, blood-staining ancient looms. The QCCN loomed closer, her eyes glowing like burning coals. Key's breath caught. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer taught to him by the monk, one of banishment and release. The amulet flared. Copper threads snapped. The river of threads slowed. With one final push, Kai shattered the glowing bonds. He fell to the ground, gasping. When he opened his eyes, the QCCN was gone. Only a faint trace of copper dust lingered in the air. Outside the kiln, the night was calm again. The curse had been confronted. But Kai knew deep inside the QCCN was not defeated. Not truly. Her spirit was bound by something beyond human understanding. And the province itself carried the scars. As dawn broke, Kai vowed to protect Shothan, not just from the physical, but from the threads of past sins woven tightly into the very fabric of the land. Because in this cursed province, some threads could never be fully cut. The final white cloth. The air in Shothan was heavy with silence, as if the land itself was holding its breath. After months of investigation, nightmares, and unspeakable truths, Investigator Levan Kai finally stood before the last piece of the puzzle, the white cloth, the very fabric that had bound the tragic spirit of the QCCN for centuries. For years, villagers spoke in hushed tones about the white cloth the shroud held tightly in the dead bride's hand as she was condemned. It was said that anyone who saw it in their dreams was marked, destined to disappear within 3 days. But now, with the evidence laid bare, Kai knew it was more than superstition. It was the key to ending the curse that had strangled Shothan in fear. In his hands, he held the cloth carefully, now cleansed and wrapped in silk. It was fragile, yet pulsing faintly with an eerie energy as if still alive. The villagers gathered in the main square at dusk. Lanterns flickered like fireflies, casting dancing shadows on ancient walls. The elders recited prayers, invoking blessings from ancestors and spirits alike. The local monk, an aged man with eyes like weathered stone, held Key's arm steady. "This cloth holds her soul's tether," the monk said solemnly. "Return it to where her pain began, and peace may finally follow." Kai nodded, determined. They moved slowly toward the giant kapok tree where the QCCN was said to have been hung. Centuries ago, her fingers gripping that very cloth. As the first stars appeared, Kai laid the white cloth carefully round the base of the tree. The wind stirred, and a low hum vibrated through the ground. For a moment, it seemed the entire village was listening. Then, a soft glow emerged from the cloth. The fabric shimmered, folding and twisting, as if a hidden hand gently smoothed its creases. From within, a pale light rose, casting a serene glow on the surrounding faces. Suddenly a whisper floated on the breeze, fragile, sorrowful, but free. Thank you. Kai felt tears sting his eyes. The long nightmare, the lives lost, the silent screams it was finally over. Or so he thought. The night deepened, and the villagers dispersed, returning to their homes with weary hearts and hopeful prayers. Kai remained beneath the kapok tree, contemplating everything he had witnessed, the unending chain of sacrifice, the faceless bride, the copper threads, the blood pact that had bound souls across generations. He touched the white cloth once more, feeling a strange warmth. Then, suddenly, pain. A sharp sting at his left hand. Looking down, Key's breath caught. A thin trickle of blood seeped from his ring finger, the very finger that had been missing from every victim before. His heart pounded as a cold dread washed over him. The curse was not broken. Not yet. His mind raced, trying to make sense of this final betrayal. Had he, too, been marked, bound unknowingly by the ancient pact? He clenched his fist tightly, suppressing the growing panic. In the distance, the kapok tree's branches swayed, but there was no wind. From the shadows, a soft rustle. Key's eyes darted to the darkened tree line. A flicker of movement. A figure appeared, faint, translucent, the unmistakable shape of the faceless bride. She extended a hand toward him, fingers delicate and empty where the ring finger should be. Key's pulse thundered in his ears. He took a step back, but the apparition smiled a gentle, almost mournful expression. "You are the last thread," she whispered, voice echoing like a lullaby. "Bound by fate, bound by blood." Kai swallowed hard. "Is there no end?" The ghostly bride shook her head slowly. "The pact can be broken, but only by one who dares to carry the burden." Her hand touched his bleeding finger. Instantly, Kai felt a surge, cold, burning, pulling him between worlds. Visions overwhelmed him, centuries of pain, sacrifice, love, and betrayal. He saw the original bride, innocent and betrayed, struggling against her fate. He saw the spinner of threads, cursed by ancestors to carry the bloodline's sins. He saw the village, trapped in an endless cycle of fear. And finally, he saw himself, the one chosen to either break the chain or become its final victim. When Kai opened his eyes, the vision was gone. He was alone beneath the kapok tree, but the blood on his finger remained, and with it, the weight of an ancient curse. He knew his life would never be the same. The final white cloth had brought peace to the village, but at a cost. The story of Shothan was not one of simple victory. It was a warning that some threads, once woven, can never be fully cut, and some souls, once bound, never truly rest. Kai folded the white cloth carefully and tucked it inside his coat. He glanced one last time at the kapok tree, now calm under the moonlight. Then he turned and walked away, because the night was far from over. The last thread unravels. The village of Shothan lay silent beneath a moon shrouded in mist. The kapok tree, once a beacon of fear and sorrow, stood stoic as if guarding secrets older than memory itself. Investigator Levan Kai had hoped the white cloth ritual would end the nightmare, but the cold drop of blood on his finger reminded him otherwise. The curse was not done. The villagers still whispered of disappearances and strange lights flickering in the dead of night. Mothers kept their children close, and elders offered prayers louder than before. The stories, passed from one trembling voice to another, wove a tapestry of dread, linking the past with a present still haunted. Kai returned to his humble home, but sleep evaded him each night. Dreams pulled him back to that kiln, to the loom of bone and copper, to the faceless bride whose eyes burned like coals in the dark. Then, one evening, a faint knock disturbed the quiet. At the door stood an old woman draped in worn, white garments. Her eyes held the weight of centuries, her voice a breath of the past. You carry the blood, she said simply. The last thread is not yet cut. Kai invited her in, sensing she was no ordinary visitor. She spoke of the ancient mountain spirit bound by the blood pact, of sacrifices made and promises broken. She told him that the QCCN was both victim and guardian, trapped between worlds until true justice was served. The old woman revealed a hidden scroll, stained and brittle. It spoke of a ritual forgotten by time, one that could finally sever the curse. But the price was great. The one who performed it must offer a part of their own soul, forever binding them to the spirit world as protector. Kai faced a choice to free Shothan at the cost of his own freedom, or to let the curse linger, consuming more innocent lives. That night, beneath the kapok tree, with the villagers watching silently, Kai began the ritual. The ancient words slipped from his lips, carrying the weight of centuries. The white cloth unfurled, glowing softly as copper threads wove through the air, binding past and present. Pain pierced his heart as he felt his soul tugged away. The faceless bride appeared, reaching out with empty hands. But instead of fear, Kai felt a strange calm. He understood then the QCCN was not a monster, but a sorrowful spirit seeking release. As the ritual reached its peak, the threads shattered like glass, and the bride's form dissolved into a cascade of glowing threads ascending toward the moon. Kai collapsed, breathless but free. Dawn broke over Shothan, bathing the village in golden light. The kapok tree stood bare, its branches free of shadows. For the first time in generations, peace reigned. But as Kai touched his left hand, he found no blood, only a small copper ring, warm to the touch. The old woman smiled faintly, fading into the morning mist. Your soul will watch over them now. The last thread is woven, but never broken. And so the story ends, or perhaps it begins anew. For in Shothan, some stories never truly fade. They are whispered in the wind, etched in the bark of trees, woven into the fabric of time. Tales of the QCCN, tales of blood and copper threads, tales that remind us all, some curses are born of sorrow, and some spirits only rest when justice is done.